Hi, welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a lovely day today. For the free wire tutorial today, I'm going to show you how to make a little pair of butterfly earrings. So I've already made one. And what I would tend to do is make them so that they're symmetrically opposite to one another, and then wear them with the body against the neckline and then the wing coming out to the side. So let's head down to the board, we'll take a closer look at the project together and have a quick chat about the materials you'll need. So here's our little butterfly earring. Could be considered a side view maybe. I think they're really cute, and you can obviously play around with the shapes of the wings. You can make much more rounded ones. You can try to replicate a specific butterfly or moth if you prefer. Some of the swallowtail butterflies have really elaborate wing shapes, so you can have a bit of a research and see what you want to do. As I'm making these as earring pairs, I will try to replicate these. So whereas I'm going to show you how to create the basic shape, what I would recommend doing whilst you're working is to do this in piecework. So do the first coil, measure the point at which you bring the wire back up, and then do the same thing on your second piece of wire. So let's quickly talk about materials. I've got some 2.5mm beads, and I've used probably around about 12 on each piece. I've also got a pair of earring findings. You can either create your own or use some ready-made like I am. 2 gauges of wire. We're going to be working with 1mm 18 gauge wire and 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire. Now I've made one of these in a gold colour craft wire, and the second one I'm going to be making in a copper colour craft wire, just because why I have the capacity to do that. I have the absolute opportunity to change around my jewellery to suit my desires, so I really like mixing metals. I really enjoy the fact that I'm going to make the shape very similar, but the colour completely different. I am going to stick to the same beads, although you could absolutely play around with all of those. So let's pop this up into the corner for now, and we'll make a start on our project. I'm going to start off by warming through my 12 inches of that 1mm 18 gauge wire. I'm going to make sure that both of those ends are cut flush. We will be trimming away a percentage of this wire, which can be used for other projects when you get there. Where we're going to start is just on the first small round form, and we're going to use some round nose pliers to generate a slightly rounded shape. Let's just pull that away for a second, and ideally we want to try and keep that to be the same size as the first one. So when you're making earrings, it does generally pay to make the form first before you add any beads, but that would be very dull for you to watch and you wouldn't be able to see what it's supposed to look like. So what I want to have is a straight line coming away from that looped shape, so you will just need to play around to get a nice, good, strong line, and just then make sure that that loop is closed up. When you're happy that the loop is the right size and that the wire coming away is at the correct angle, I might just take a second to close that up just a little bit more. Give that a squish to get some strength into your framework. Now we are going to be using wire of a finer gauge to hold those beads in the channel, and what that means is if you do mark the wire, it's just a little bit less important. So whilst I will be making these as opposite to one another, I don't need to worry about the direction at the moment. So I'm just going to basically trace over the top of my first design. I'm going to measure approximately where that first angle takes its change, and then I'm going to just switch those chain nose pliers in and bring quite a strong angle back up. Now we are trying to keep this in 2 dimensions, so that looks to be reasonably the same kind of shape. Your earrings do need to be reasonable in terms of how similar they are, but because they're on opposite sides of the head, you don't have to stress about it. Now the banging you're hearing is the wire just at the other end, so I'm just going to loop that around for a second, so hopefully it will be less noisy on the microphone. So again, it's much easier to create these 2 frames first so that you can see that they are indeed very similar before you add those beads. What I'm looking for is some nice straight lines. You do also have the opportunity, if you wish to just hammer the frames before you add the second size of wire and those beads into position. So if I just bring the project onto its side for a second, what we're going to do now is make sure that that angle is much closer. So I'm going to grip the straight line and then draw the tail of wire back over towards the starting point. What I want is to have a little bit of a taper here. Before I pop those pliers in on the taper, draw that wire much past where I want it to be and then bring it back out again. And you get a slightly firmer angle just here than if you just bring the wire to this position. You can do that a couple of times if you need to, but don't over flex the wire, otherwise you will weaken it and it then won't last quite as long as you want it to. So what we're looking to create here is a channel which our beads will fit in. So if I grab one from my little bead pot and just push that up between, I can see that I've made my channel a little bit broader than it needs to be, and now that is an easy fix. All we're going to do is close this angle up slightly and then draw the straight line away. Once I'm happy that that fits exactly how I want it to, I'm going to just squish and squeeze, or you could very, very lightly hammer the first half without touching this second section yet. So the next angle change we need to make is at the base of the lower wing segment. I am not a lepidopterist, so therefore I don't know the explicit terminology. I'm just going to call it where the wing comes out of the body. So if I hold that above and just lift it slightly, you'll see that that's approximately the right position. What I would say is move your pliers down just a teeny tiny amount, because when you make the bend in the wire, because the wire itself is 1 millimetre across, it will appear slightly further along than you might want it to. So what we're going to do is lay that over the top, make sure I haven't overcooked it, taken it slightly too far. If you have, you can very gently just nibble that along a little bit and then bring the wire back down. Let's pop that over the top again. So that's a reasonable facsimile as far as I'm concerned. I'm just going to bring that direction out slightly so that it matches the first bend in the wing there. And what we're going to do is just basically trace the shape that we have in our first design. Now, another way of doing this is to draw your design on paper first. Just a little scrap of paper is plenty, and use a reasonably broad tipped marker pen to generate the shape, and then you can use that to create the shape over and over again if you wanted to do it that way instead. I'm doing the cheats way, which is just one pair at a time. So we're going to try and get these to look quite similar. So the next bend I want to make is just here. So I'm just going to push the wire away, and it's basically a case of just making those small movements and those small angle changes as you go through. What we need to do now is grip the base of that wing and put a bend in it. Now this is just my design for the butterfly. Yours could be completely different. You could make a very elaborate swallowtail. I've made that bend a little bit too soon. So what I'm going to do is just squish my pliers back together. You'll see that we've straightened up that line. And because we're going to be putting the bend in again just afterwards, any marks on the plier that you've made, any marks with the plier that you've created on the wire are really very, very small, especially if you've warmed that wire through first. So once you're happy with each of your angle changes, we're going to draw that wire back up and over. Let's just keep referring back to that first model. As I said before, you can, of course, just pop this onto a piece of paper first so that you have a design ready to go, and then trace your design. So I think I've made that just a little bit too long, but that's fine. I'm not overly worried. What we're going to do now, if you want to have curving sections on your wing, is use the heat of your body to help you generate that curve. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with these lines first. Give them a squish and a squeeze to kind of set them. Give them a little bit more strength and rigidity. You will be able to play around with those angles, but I just want a little bit of help from my wire, because when I do the next manoeuvre, I could very easily disrupt the whole lot. So because I warmed the wire, it does want to create arcs for you. So let's just pop that over the top. The angles are slightly off, which I can adjust later. So if I need to tighten this one up, I'm just going to very, very gently, and you'll notice that I'm risking my fingertips here, but I'm taking very small, controlled pinches. So if you're concerned about your fingertips, you can use the pliers the other way up. Just take care, move slowly, make small movements, and in that way you're much more likely to be able to bring anything back if it's gone too far, and also you're less likely to damage your fingertips. Now I've tried to keep the angle change between those two wings just here, quite close to the line of beads. And that's just because I think it gives you a cohesive vision of the body of your wee beastie. So we're looking to recreate that on the second side just here. So again, I have to point out I'm not a lepidopterist. I don't know what all of the body parts are called. I also encourage you to have a look at various different models and photographs on the internet. There is a plethora of shapes and forms to choose from, and one of the joys of making your own jewellery is that you can completely control how things look. So just take your time. When you make a bend, you can always just refine that slightly, especially if you warm your wire first. Let's head back down to the board. So my two frames aren't exactly the same, but they're close enough that once they're on opposite sides of the head worn as earrings, that it will not be a problem. So to make any curvy aspects to any wings that you want to add onto your design, just use your own body heat and finger shapes to help you with those. If you find that you're really struggling with that, you can always grab in a mandrel or something from around the home that has a nice arced form to it and just allow that to help you. So again, I'm just going to refer back to the physical frame in front of me, but you could always use a drawing, a sketch on some notepaper. So let's just trace that wire over the top and then pop those pliers in just to bring down that top wing edge. So again, I'm going to bring that slightly closer once I've measured it by eye. And then I'm going to put a little bit of a kink in at the top of this wing, just because it adds interest, not because I'm replicating a particular beastie. So I'm just allowing the wire to arc for me. Less work that you have to do is better for your hands, really. So let's see what that looks like. I think I actually prefer the one here than I do here. So let's just post-edit this one slightly to give that top wing a slightly more arced and flowing shape. It's a little bit prettier, I think. So what we're going to do now is turn the tail of the wire upwards to bring it up towards the top section. Now you will need to bring your pliers before you make that bend slightly higher up than you think you need to, because again, that wire being 1 millimeter thick, it will move slightly from where you think it will need to be. So another thing to notice is that the wire up here is a little bit too close on the body side. That's really easy to fix just by creating a slightly bulgier section on that upper wing. You can bring it over slightly. What we're looking for is to keep the channel into which we're going to add beads later as similar across as we possibly can. You do, as I say, when you finish creating the form, before we add any beads or secondary wires, you have the opportunity to give this a little bit of a hammer. So it's quite floopy at the moment, but we're not going to overly worry about it. It's a very, very simple design, just using one of those loops up at the top to pop into your earring finding. So creating strength in that loop is ideal. What we're going to do now is estimate whereabouts we need that loop to be. It's a very simple design. I really enjoy making these. So if I put my pliers in, you can bring the other design upwards if you need to. And what I need to do here is just roll that around slightly so that the actual loop sits just a little bit higher than the one on the first side. I'm going to draw that tail all the way around underneath so that we've got those two little antennae style designs up at the top. And when I'm happy that that sits how I want it to sit, I'm going to flip it over. Let's just smooth that scrap wire and trim away with the flush side of your cutters. There's a good sort of 4 inches of wire still available. And what we're going to do is now spend time refining this shape. So I'm going to bring that loop slightly more rounded and then give it a squish. So at the moment, we've got two that are the same-ish. as the same as I want them to be for right now anyway. So when we start to add beads into this channel, it will draw those two wires slightly closer together, but we do want to try and get those angles as close as we possibly can to our final choice. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a pinch and make sure both sides of the body are nice and straight. Once you're absolutely delighted with that, you absolutely can hammer it. So let's just grab a block, pop our little piece on and find my chasing hammer. So with a design like this, when you start to hammer, what can happen if you don't support the complete form is that bits of it will start to splay out. When you're whacking the metal on the block, it spreads, and it won't just spread outwards equally, because unless you're a machine, it's actually really difficult to strike in a completely downwards fashion. So you tend to put slightly more pressure on one side. I'm right dominant, so I tend to put a little bit more pressure on that outside of my hammer. It might be different for you. However, if you control the spread of the wire, so for instance, I would start by making sure I'm delighted with the shape and form, making sure that I have that channel which is equal all the way along, doing whatever minor adjustments you need to do, and I will start by hammering the outside of the wings. This gives me a really good place to start because it will slow the spread of the wire elsewhere on the form. So what I'm going to do is just pinch really firmly and set this lower wing section next. And then move around the frame little by little, making sure that I'm supporting anywhere that could potentially spread. So right now, what I want to do is hammer the centre of the design. Before moving on to the parts that are most likely to move around as you hammer them, because they're not anchored to any other part of the design, I'm just going to make sure that I'm super happy with how these are looking before I pinch them very, very firmly down. And strike them quite deliberately. Now, if I'm going to put a little more pressure on anywhere on this design, it will be on the upper of the two antennae. Like so, because it's the part that I definitely don't want to open up. So now it's had, you can see there's a little bit of spreading just in here. Let me take the block off screen. I just want to make sure that that loop does in fact meet the wire. On both sides, it's much less likely to interrupt hair or clothes, scarves and the such if you make sure that those ends are flush against the rest of the framework. So if I flip the design over now, you'll see that we have two not quite symmetrical butterfly forms. So for the last part of our tutorial today, we're going to learn how to channel set those little beads in the body of the beastie. I've grabbed around about 12 inches of 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I have my earring finding and pot of beads at the ready. Just realised, I just found on my desk some little chakra or rainbow loops of microfaceted gemstones that I made up a couple of years ago. These are the last few that I've got in stock, and I just think they would look absolutely gorgeous. Maybe 2 of each bead just running up the centre of a butterfly would be really, really cute. Anyway, we're going to cast our wire on down at the bottom of the butterfly. And what I like to do is to lay the end of the finer gauge wire over the top of the frame. And I'm going to allow myself about 2/3 of an inch of wire just over the top, and that's just because it gives me an opportunity to get a really good grip on the wire. Now I'm going to allow that to circle around really tightly a good 3 or 4 times. Now I like to put 3 wraps between each bead, but I've wrapped on 4 times down at the base, and that's just because I like a little bit of security. Now at this stage, if you're making your earrings opposite to one another, you will need to make sure that you have the up side of your design facing and that the wire goes over the top first. Let's give that a bit of a smooth down for a second. If I flip the frame over to the back, draw that wire over the top, what we're going to do is trim that last tiny little bit away, put it straight in the scrap pot and smooth that cut end down. so that the cut end sits inside that frame. And I'm not going to squish that coil too much just at the moment. Turning it back over to the upside, what we're going to do is to scooch that down as far as it will go. And I'm just going to hold the frame the wrong way so that the head is down at the base of the screen now. And I'm going to find the end of that wire and grab myself one of these lovely little check faceted beads. So these are about 2.5mm, but really as long as you allow space enough in the channel, whatever you want to work with is the answer. So the finer gauge wire has wrapped 4 times in this instance around the body side of the channel. Now I'm going to take the wire around just the wing side of that body channel. So if I lift this slightly into the light, we're going to use the gap up at the top between the antenna to draw the wire around so that we wrap 3 times, like so, and then draw the wire across underneath that channel. Once I've got that wire back and across underneath, I'm going to tighten up that coil and make sure I'm happy with the sighting of my first bead. Now I think it could be slightly closer to that base, that far end of the body. So we're just going to scooch that down until it sits exactly where we want it to. That looks much better. I'm more than delighted with that. So if I switch my grip again, get some good tension so that that wire moves flat across the back of the design. Pinch the bead into position, and now I'm going to wrap 3 times around just the open side of that body channel. That's 2, and then that's 3. On the 3rd pass, we just leave it lingering over the top of the design. And let's grab a next bead into position. So let's slide that down like a little zip line until it sits in that channel of the body. So again, I'm going to pinch the bead into position while I draw the wire all the way around the side of the channel, which forms the body, nearest to the wings. And I'm going to bring that tail up the centre. That's why we start down at the bottom. That's a 2nd wrap and then a 3rd wrap. When the 3rd wrap has finished, you take the wire across the back of the design, scooch that coil up neatly. Now protect your beads, and you can tighten those coils with your pliers, or you can do that with your nails. It depends how you feel about protecting your nails. So let's take the wire across the back one more time and wrap 3 times around the open side of that body channel. Scooch that wire coil up, and then we will simply continue all the way along. Now I will just show you on the piece I've already made that when you get to the gap between the 2 wings, I've just gone for 1 pass of wire, and what that does is it holds the wings firmly in position. So what I'm going to do is set a couple more beads just quickly off camera, and I'll join you when I get to this central section and we'll work that out together. So I've added another couple of beads. I've taken the wire underneath the frame, wrapped 3 times around the open side of that body channel, and I'm now ready to add in the bead that will connect to the wings. So it doesn't really matter if they're not completely symmetrical, but if you can get them to sit so that you've got, for instance, there are 4 beads next to the lower wing. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 beads next to the lower wing on this one. So I've slightly failed on the whole symmetrical thing, but I'm not going to let it ruin my day. You can obviously spend a little bit more time making sure that your shapes and sizes are exactly the same. So when I get my bead that's going to connect to the wing in position, I'm going to pinch it exactly the same way as I've already done, and then I'm going to draw the wire between the upper and lower wings, and then just bring it straight back underneath. So on the underneath side, you get these little straight line bars of wire. I'm just trying to flick them in the light. There you can see them just being picked up by the light there. Bring that back over to the top, and you'll see that just 1 pass of wire around the the wing section. And then what we're going to do is make sure that we're retaining that channel. Wrap 3 times around the open side of the body channel before we add our next bead in. So this is the last bead I'm going to demonstrate to you, but one of the things that can happen when you pull that wing nice and tight is you'll see that your upper wing is now slightly too close. There isn't quite enough space in this channel. So the easiest way to solve that issue is just to lift that wing ever so very slightly. Try to stay away from any harsh angles where you've hammered, because that will now be slightly more fragile in terms of moving it. This long sweeping arc, we've got enough strength here to just open the design up slightly, and in doing that we can now fit our next bead in. So let's find the next bead from my pot. Find the hole in aforementioned bead. This is my least favourite part of any tutorial. Zip line that bead down into position, and then we're going to continue in exactly the same way. So I'm going to support that bead whilst I wrap 3 times around the body channel closest to the wings and bring that back across underneath. Again, you can use either your nails or your tools to just straighten that up. And then we're going to, from the underneath, wrap 3 times around the side of the body channel that is on the open section. So if you find that you've not quite got enough space, you can very, very gently wiggle until you've got that done. But I'm going to continue on my merry way until I've filled those last couple of beads up towards the antenna of my butterfly. So I finished off with 4 wraps around the body channel up at the top to replicate the 4 that I started with at the base, and I've just popped in my favourite earring finding. So I've now got myself a little pair. Admittedly, they're different wire colours, but I kind of like that. Butterfly earrings made easy. I'll pop a little photograph at the end of the video for you to take a closer look. I hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial. I'll be back really soon with some more. Bye for now.